I love that bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to what I think is the fourth in this Beer and Brexit series. I'm absolutely delighted that we've got Richard Tice here with us tonight. Richard is a long-standing Eurosceptic. I think you were a director of Business for Sterling back in the 90s.
20 years ago. God.
He's also been successful in what us academics like to call the real world. It says here that you are a property tycoon, which sounds...
overstated, don't believe it.
That sounds very impressive to me anyway. Richard co-founded Leave.eu with Aaron Banks, and you were described by Aaron Banks in his book on the bad boys of Brexit as the acceptable face of Leave.eu and the one they'd want speaking to the police if they were all in a car and got pulled over. I think that's praise. I'm not...
I think so.
Yeah.
Hardly an epitaph for the headstone, is it?
And more to the point for our purposes tonight, Richard is co-chair of Leave Means Leave, that was founded in his own words following the pushback from the establishment and a refusal to accept the referendum result. Is that?
Yep. Yeah. Spot on.
No one's clapped an introduction before. This is you're miles ahead. He also tells me, I don't know if this is right, that you spent some time in Strangeways playing football.
Yeah. I mean, how many people here have been to Strangeways prison? I went twice, actually. I was a goalkeeper. I played for Salford University, and surprise, surprise, we always had to play away. I pulled this guy down in the penalty area, and a warder came up to me, and he said, "If you know what's good for you, son, you'll let it in."
Brilliant. Right, just to kick us off with some easy stuff. What made you a Eurosceptic? When did it happen? Did you have a Damascene moment, or...?
Yeah, in the mid-90s. And believe it or not, I actually wrote to Gordon Brown a 3-page letter saying we mustn't join the euro. And shortly after, Business for Sterling was founded. Bluntly, I hate fraud, waste and corruption. And in my view, the EU is riddled with all three of those things.
But I mean, just to clarify, you were anti-euro.
Anti-joining the euro, yeah.
But were you anti-being in the
EU at that
EU
time?
at that time?
It evolved pretty quickly afterwards. I was very, very sceptical of it.
All right, because for a lot of skeptics date their objection to membership to Maastricht.
Yeah, I was still pretty young then.
Okay. That's a good answer.
My thoughts were evolving.
Okay. All right. So in the referendum itself, was there a moment when you thought, blimey, we're going to win this?
Yeah, I knew about 3 or 4 weeks before when the Labour MPs started to come back to Westminster, ashen-faced, when they had heard from their constituents in the Labour heartlands that actually they weren't going to listen to their MPs, they weren't going to listen to Project Fear, and they were going to vote to leave. And that was the moment where I thought, it's definitely on.
But were you confident that all those people... I mean, for me, it was obvious if you went to the north during the referendum campaign that there was a groundswell of opinion, and the only doubt that was in my mind was whether people who'd actually given up on the ballot box would bother to register and vote. I mean...
The only doubt in my mind was whether, when it came to actually standing in the booth, would people panic and just say, but they didn't, and, you know, I was pretty confident.
Why did you choose to join Leave.eu rather than campaigning with...
Well, essentially, Aaron and I, we founded it. I mean, the truth of it is, I went to Matthew Elliott in February 15. I said, Matthew, the day of the general election in 2015, we need to come out with a strong statement saying we've raised X million pounds, we're headhunting for a chief executive, and we're off, and we're going to be ready. And he said, no, that's not the plan at all. He said that we would have to wait until David Cameron came back from what would be a summit, and then we would launch the Leave campaign. And I said, that's way too late, way too late. And if that had happened, then there's no question we would not have won. So Aaron and I, we resolved to set it up and get going.
So it was impatience with the other campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a business-like approach to, you know, we've got a serious thing, we need to raise a load of money, and we need to be ready, and we need to gear up the country, because it could come soon.
But did you share Aaron Banks's critique of Vote Leave as just being the sort of metropolitan elite talking to each other and not...
Well, Vote Leave didn't exist then, and Vote Leave basically was bounced into setting up very, very quickly because of what we were doing with Leave.eu. And suddenly, parts of the Tory party got very concerned that actually we would steal such a march, we would get the designation.
Okay, but do you think that, I mean, there was a policy divide of sorts, wasn't there, between the two Leave campaigns, that you focused on different sorts of issues?
Yeah, there was, absolutely. I mean, we felt that it was, immigration was a significant part of it, not only, but it was a significant part of it. And we were going to focus, we were just going to focus on sort of the simple issues and being proud to be British, being confident of our position leading the Commonwealth, being confident of our position in the world, and Vote Leave wanted to adopt a different approach.
Was there anything about the tone or tenor of that campaign that made you uncomfortable? I mean, whether it was Breaking Point, the way
of the Leave.eu. Look, things move very quickly, and when you get into a big campaign, and this was the first big campaign I'd been in, so I mean, and likewise, Aaron. I mean, things move very quickly, and yeah, in the heat of the moment, things get said and done that you think maybe that was a bit over the top.
Okay. What do you think was the major reason why people voted to leave?
What was the major reason? I think, truthfully, the slogan was simple. It was about controlling laws, money, and borders. It was about, we're the 5th biggest economy in the world. We should be able, we're big enough, we're good enough. We should be able to do this stuff. And I think there was a real, if you look back, the previous 20 years, we all, whatever newspaper you read, we've all read daft stories about some ridiculous law that's come out of the EU. And you think, oh, that's bonkers. Even hardened people who like the EU would have to admit that, some strange daft stuff does come out.
But equally, you have to admit that some of those stories just weren't true.
Well, we didn't really know. I mean, if it's in the Daily Mail, it must be true, isn't it? I mean...
But would you accept that, I mean, as the Cabinet shows, that actually one of the issues we're dealing with now is that people voted Leave for a whole variety of often conflicting, if not outright contradictory reasons?
No, I don't accept that, actually. I don't think contradictory reasons. Sure, people voted for different reasons. For some people, sovereignty was more important than, for example, money or, or borders, and vice versa. I think, but the slogan was pretty clear and simple.
No, the slogan was very clear, but it wasn't precise. And what I mean by this is, you would hear senior Conservative politicians during the campaign saying, look, all I want is control over migration. Actually, I'd be perfectly comfortable if migration went up. This is about control. If you went to some of those northern heartlands, that wasn't the message. People were voting to cut immigration. I mean, there were parts of West London where Indians were voting because they thought they'd get more Indians in. I mean,
yeah, look, I mean, different things get said around the country for sure. But I think the reality is, if you look back to the 1990s, for example, on the issue of immigration, we had average immigration of 62,500 people. And guess what? The economy was growing at wages were growing at a real growth rate of 2.8% per annum for a decade. Give or take, call that 30%. In the last decade, we've had immigration of over 250,000 a year. And guess what? Real wages, zero growth. And for the least well-off in society, they are 30% worse off than their peers 20 years previously. And they worked that out, even though the politicians hadn't worked it out. People around the country knew something was wrong, and they knew they were poor, they couldn't understand why. And then, things like 0 hours contracts, which I'm not a fan of, and my own son actually was essentially subject of a really bad 0 hour contract. Those have developed as a result mainly of unlimited, low-skilled immigration that has meant that, employers of a certain type have been able to push down on terms and conditions.
Well, I mean, I think you've hinted at correlation there. I'm not convinced about causation, but the question was, within the Leave campaign, there were people who said, let them in, we'll have more of them as long as we don't have freedom of movement. There were others who wanted to cut it. I mean, what I'm trying to get at is, isn't one of the problems the vagueness of the Leave campaign? One of the problems that we're dealing with now, that people had different expectations of it. Let me give you one example. I was at the Tory party conference and I went to a fringe event on agriculture. And speaker after speaker stood up and said, I'm a Brexiter, I voted Brexit, but, and the buts were, but we want to keep subsidies, but we want to keep tariffs, but we want to keep access to seasonal workers.
But the joy of that, the joy of all of that is that when you leave, and that's a very simple word, leave,
Yeah.
you've then got control to make those decisions, to have that democratic debate internally as a nation. And that's what democracy is all about.
Okay. That I buy, but you don't then see, you wouldn't then see it as somehow a contradiction of a key message of the campaign if we, once we've left, we make a decision to increase immigration. That would be fine, because actually it's about having the sovereign decision rather
Exactly.
than...
It's about,
okay, all right.
it's about having the sovereign control, and, you know, that's what democracy, you know, you have a debate, you form a view, and then if you don't like how it's panning out, you can change it.
Okay. Let's talk about no deal.
Yeah.
I mean, you said, I think the quote you came out with was that in business,
Yep.
no deal is always better than a bad deal.
Yep.
Surely that is a fundamentally misleading analogy, because if you have no deal in business, you remain where you are. You stay with the status quo. If you have no deal with the EU, and by no deal, let's be clear, I mean no withdrawal agreement, nothing. So the talks break down now and we leave with nothing. You don't revert to the status quo.
Well, let's be very clear. In business, if you do no deal forever, you'll go bust.
Yeah.
Okay? So you do keep doing deals, but what you're not going to do is a bad deal. I mean, we've all done bad deals, but we haven't deliberately done bad deals. But when you
done a deal.
When you go into a negotiation, you have to be prepared not to do that deal. Otherwise, you're going to get a bad deal. You know, I mean, in business, you're just going to get shafted.
All right, you have to signal to the other side
Yeah.
that you're prepared to walk away. Granted. But getting to the substance, are you really convinced that a no deal is something we should seriously be thinking of as an option?
Of course, absolutely. You know, I actually subscribe to the view that what should have happened, and we at Leave Means Leave, we said 18 months ago, we said that the deadline should be set March 18. If we haven't done a deal by then, we should say to the EU, we're going to WTO and we're going to spend the last year getting ready for it. And because, candidly, because on the Andrew Marr show, the day before David Davis started negotiating, our own Chancellor went on TV and said a bad deal would be a very, very bad outcome. I mean, that completely cut the legs off David Davis the following day when he started. Yeah. You know, what sort of basis is that to go into a negotiation? It's unbelievable. In business, so I'm the managing director of a business, and I walk in to start a negotiation, and the CEO comes in 5 minutes beforehand and says, we're going to pay another 20 million for this deal. It's just not how you do things.
I get the signalling point, absolutely, which is you have to give the impression that you're preparing, that you're prepared, that actually in extremis you'll walk away, because otherwise you've weakened your own position. But just no deal isn't about WTO. No deal is about...
Right. So there's two types of no deal. There's no deal where we don't do some form of trade deal.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
But let's be very, very clear about this. There is a legal obligation on both sides, under Article 8 and under Article 50, and under WTO rules, to reach a deal on the administrative arrangements. Let's be very, very clear about that. Not enough people are saying this, but that is the legal position.
What do you mean by the administrative arrangements?
So things like organising the technicalities that people are getting very excited about border checks, about whether or not planes can fly, about whether or not we're going to have enough ham and cheese coming into our country to fill our sandwiches, that sort of stuff.
Well, look, there's no doubt that both sides will want to make an arrangement on this at some point. My issue is, surely the problem with no deal is not about our long-term trading future, we'll come back to that. It's about short-term chaos, because in the period it takes, the problem with no deal, and it's nothing to do with whether you like the EU or not, or whether you like the WTO or not, is just that a load of laws that govern our interaction with our nearest partner will cease to exist.
Well, and that's what I call the administrative arrangements.
But it will take weeks, if not months, to sort those out.
So, as I've said before, and hang on, as I said before...
Thank you very much. Keep going.
Hang on. In business, actually, there's nothing like a short deadline to concentrate the minds and to focus the attention. And, you know, yes, the government has left it too late to be looking at, you know, they should have done what we said, which was give ourselves a year. So we've got less time. But you've got to be saying, look, that's what we're doing. And the fact is, Philip Hammond prevented the departments from having the money to spend on no-deal planning. So it's a bit late, right?
Okay,
We can still do it. And let's not forget this point. There is a legal obligation to sort out these issues.
Well, firstly, yes, I buy your point that actually if we invest in the ports and the infrastructure, it would cushion the effect. Absolutely. Two things, though. If the French don't, it's a waste of time, because actually you'll end up with the same queues at the ports. If they...
No, it's not. The great thing about business people, right, who want to buy and sell stuff is if you've got a good product, someone else will buy it. Mm-hmm. And what will happen, because business people are very good at finding ways to jump over hurdles and get around barriers that governments put in their way. And what will actually happen very, very quickly is people will start moving goods, for example, into Rotterdam or into other ports around the EU. We will use other ports. We will, do more through Southampton or Felixstowe. And guess what? We might buy a load of goods from elsewhere around the world. And I love the Tim Martin story. Tim Martin, who, he's created an amazing business of 1,000 pubs. Mm-hmm. Tim told his buying team about 6 or 9 months ago, right, guys and girls, we're not going to buy any more booze from the European Union. Right, now, I didn't know, for example, that Australia produces fantastic brandy. I didn't know, for example, that Lancashire produces a very good equivalent to Jägermeister. But actually,
whatever that is.
Yeah. Okay, it's a delicious German liqueur, particularly late at night. But what he said was, right, let's make sure that we can keep our business and we'll buy other goods from elsewhere in the world, and that's what businesses will do. So that's why actually all of this scaremongering about, we're going to run out of this and that and t'other, it's nonsense.
Well, two things. One, in the short term, surely it is possible, because even businesses with their great adaptability will have to adapt, and that will take time. And the second thing is, just think about Ryanair, okay? I mean, this is where it gets tricky. I agree with you on administrative arrangements. What is the law that allows a carrier from one country to fly between two other countries, which is a law that exists nowhere else in the world? It's an EU law.
Okay. Yeah, and it's a good point. There are two parts to that. Firstly, well-run businesses...
Why are they booing Ryanair?
The thing about well-run businesses...
Lots of reasons to boo Ryanair, but yeah.
Well-run businesses should have been recognising that the base case scenario was a WTO deal. That's the only thing you could guarantee, okay? So well-run businesses actually should be well on the way to getting ready for a World Trade Organization trading arrangement. Coming on to Ryanair, my reading, and I have read some pretty dull stuff over recent years. I've even read the GDPR document. That's even worse. But I've read the Open Skies Agreement, okay? Yep. Now, actually, we are a contracting signatory to that agreement.
Yep.
And the Open Skies thing that Ryanair get concerned about is because it might mean that it's hard for them to take off in Madrid and go direct to Frankfurt. That's what they're worried about,
yep.
Okay? We're still able to fly point to point from the UK to Paris or Frankfurt. What they're concerned about is it reduces their flexibility. But guess what? EasyJet have got it sorted. They set up a base in, I think it's Austria. It's a classic example. A business has identified the issue, sorted it, dealt with it, next.
Okay, but I mean, just as a slight question, do we want to encourage businesses to go elsewhere?
Well, they've done some base case planning, and I mean, that's the reality. Businesses are responding to the situation.
And just to find, I don't want to get bogged, and we are a bit bogged down. I just want to ask you one more question about this, which is, we can buy Jägermeister from Australia, fine. We're not going to create a complex supply chain and make cars with Australia, are we?
No, but guess what, guys? We could buy a load more Jeeps from America by unilaterally cutting the 10% tariff that we wrongly charge on them. Trump's right. I mean, it's not a fair deal on cars. Yeah, look, and if there's a few more Jeeps and a few less Mercedes around the UK, it's not the end of the world.
So, would you agree with Patrick Minford then that the car industry might just be one of those things we have to sacrifice, the domestic car industry?
The reality about the car industry, does anyone know here what all the car manufacturers call the UK? They call it Treasure Island because they are making pots of cash, because basically we're all being overcharged, bluntly. You know, if we are confident about our own leverage, our own negotiating position, then the car manufacturers in Germany, you know, will make it very clear they need this sorted. They've got a lot more to lose than we have.
Why haven't they yet?
Why haven't they yet? Because frankly, we've been negotiating this pretty badly. I think even all of us of any side could agree with that. I mean, so in a sense, they all think they're going to get, you know, the best side of this deal. That's why we need to stand back and we need to say that, you know, we're going to WTO and you know, that's the basis on which we're going to trade with you. And by the way, that means no money.
Well, we can come back to that. But BMW don't think this is going swimmingly well. BMW
No one thinks it's going swimmingly well. As I just said. I mean,
why aren't they doing what we were told they would do? Why aren't they rapping on Chancellor Merkel's door and saying this is outrageous, sort it out for God's sake?
Because the truth is, at the moment, they all think, and not unreasonably, that they're getting the better side of this deal. So they're staying silent.
How so? I mean, this is going to affect trade. I mean,
yeah, but well, they're all being told, because they've been told by our own politicians that, you know, we must do a deal almost at any cost. So they think a deal will be done.
Okay. So you have a bus.
We have a bus.
You have a bus.
Yes.
Buses are big these days, aren't they, in
Yeah.
politics? And it says stop the Brexit betrayal
Yes,
on the
it does,
side.
yeah.
How has Brexit been betrayed?
Well, we had great fun working out in team meetings what to write on the side of the bus. I want to put a big number on it. I mean, there was a big number on the previous bus.
I think you should have three words with Bs.
I would have put save 39 billion on it, but anyway. So how's it being betrayed? Because the Chequers proposal, which is the government's current position, it's not leaving the European Union in the true sense of the word. You know, it's Brino, it's Brexit in name only. So we're not in control of our own laws. We wouldn't be able to deregulate. We've got the common rule book. Why would we want 90% of our businesses in the UK that don't export to the European Union to suffer the burdens and the hindrances of EU regulations in order to look after the 10%? That's daft. So that's the first betrayal. The second betrayal is they talk about, you know, the arrangements with the ECJ. Well, and you know, the likelihood is we'll end up under some form of jurisdiction by some part, you know, either on a joint tribunal or something with the ECJ. But the real issue, if you can't deregulate and look after your own rules, and you become literally a complete sort of supplicant to someone else's rules, you're significantly less attractive to countries like America and Australia in terms of doing a trade deal with us, because they know that essentially we haven't got the ability to adapt and respond as you know, as the world moves on, as business conditions move on, and so on. And then you come to immigration. You know, Chequers talks about a labour mobility framework. Well, we can all guess what that is. In civil service speak, I'm sorry for any civil servants that are here, but in civil service speak, that is going to mean basically more of the status quo.
I don't think that's true, to be honest, because I think basically the Chequers deal talks about GATS provisions. I mean, the Chequers deal is nothing to do with freedom of movement. I mean, that's absolutely clear. But can I just come back on a semantic point, which might be a little bit too dull? You can say this isn't my vision of Brexit, but why is Brexit being betrayed? I mean, surely these are all... I mean, Norway's not in the EU, Switzerland's not in the EU. These are all forms of leaving the EU.
Because we were even told in the government's £9 million leaflet, you know, that we would be leaving the single market. Okay? And it is quite clear, you know, if you're signing up to a common rule book, you know, I don't care how you dress it up in legalese or words, you're not leaving the single market.
But don't you need common rules to have a trade deal with anyone? The Americans would.
No, you need common rules. If you're an exporter, then yes, you have to produce your products to the EU rules. If you export to
America,
the
domestic applicability of those rules.
90% of our businesses don't export to the European Union. We need to be able to deregulate. We need to be able to, with confidence. The post-Brexit vision is we want to be the Singapore of the West. We want to go for it. We want to have smart regulation, not daft regulation. We need to be we need to be pro-enterprise, pro-innovation, we need to encourage entrepreneurs, and we actually need to work, we positively need to say, we're not going to prop up the vested interests. Yeah. That's the vision of the future, that in a sense, Brexit could be done properly.
Yeah. I have to say, I mean, the Singapore economy functions on the back of a very large immigrant population that basically keeps it ticking over. I mean, if Singapore started imposing strict limits on...
No one's suggesting we don't have immigration. We had a very sensible immigration system, right, until we basically had the Accession 8. As I said, in the 1990s, things worked really well. We had a sensible immigration policy. We had 60-odd thousand coming a year, give or take. And actually, it worked really well. And we had a thing called a seasonal agricultural workers scheme, which meant that actually fruit was picked in the farms around the countryside. So people came, they worked, and then they moved on to the next job.
How do you think your average Leave voter in Stoke or Wigan or Doncaster, many of whom, as much as anything else, were voting as a protest against years of austerity and the like, will take to discovering that Brexit was all about massive deregulation and a rolling back of the welfare state?
It's not about rolling back of the welfare state. I don't know where that's come
from.
So
by deregulation, what do you mean? Health and safety regulations?
I mean, getting rid of unnecessary laws. For example, in my industry, in the construction world, you have to go through a dreadful thing called the EU procurement process. Mm-hmm. If in the public sector you want to, you want to sort of, let's say, build a building. And the nature of that is it just adds massive time and cost to the overall production cost of that building. Much of that is totally unnecessary. So it's not about getting rid of health and safety legislation, much of which is sensible. But let's be honest. Let's be absolutely honest about this. Some health and safety legislation is daft, right? And we should have the confidence to do away with it. Much of it is actually just about. Part of my sort of post-Brexit vision is actually. It would be quite nice if we could go back to just good old-fashioned common sense and that be encouraged.
So, I mean, I was just struck by the language you used earlier about this is about deregulating, becoming Singapore. The image that conjures up to me is of a very market-based economy where workers' rights aren't particularly well protected.
No, that's confusing two separate issues. And actually, let's be very, very clear. Open borders has led to a reduction of workers' rights for the reasons that I expressed earlier. 0-hour contracts and zero real wage growth for a decade, right? That's what really hits people in the pocket. And
you don't think zero wage growth had anything to do with the financial crisis?
Initially a bit, but the reality is, this has gone on and on. So we've got this situation now where we've got about between 4 and 4.5% unemployment, which historically always meant you would have wage inflation of between 3 and 5% compound, right? We've got, for the last few years, we've had almost zero real wage inflation because, right, basically, we've got lots of jobs and there's very little incentive to invest because basically businesses can bring in as much cheap labour as they want. So they've had no incentive to invest. Normally the labour market is restricted. So therefore what happens, if labour gets too expensive, businesses invest in capital equipment to replace the labour. That's happened for the last 150 years since the Industrial Revolution.
Why did the Migration Advisory Committee report show only a tiny, if any, correlation between lower wages and immigration?
I don't believe it. I mean, come on. Let's just look at the facts. It started in 2004, right? We've had it for give or take 14 years since the accession countries, and we've never, ever had before zero real wage inflation and low unemployment. It's not coincidence.
Well, no, but actually there's a greater correlation between that and the financial crisis, surely, because that's when wages really started to stagnate.
No, I don't accept that at all. Because fundamentally, we've got such low unemployment, and yet we've had such little wage growth. And historically, that just doesn't happen.
I'm with you that there's a problem with the economy. We're not arguing about that.
But it has to be because you've got unlimited low-skilled immigration.
Well, there are a whole range of factors why it could be. I'm just saying there has been a report recently which...
but let's be clear about the financial crisis. Yeah, that hit us for probably 3 or 4 years. But the truth is, actually, the economy has been growing pretty successfully. We're at the end, potentially, at the back end. Normally, economic cycles last somewhere between 5 and 7 years. We're 7 or 8 years in here to a recovery, post a recession. So we're sort of due a recession. Of course, now if there is one, of course, it'll be Brexit's fault. But,
Are you preparing for another referendum?
Yeah, we're to be honest, we're preparing for everything, because anything could happen. Absolutely anything could happen, and well, we just have to be honest. Anything could happen. Who knows what will go on in Parliament, the games that will be played, and the net result of that. I don't know, but we have to be prepared. We have to be ready.
And have you, 100,000 people say no.
And have you thought about the campaign you would run if there were another referendum? I mean, I just find this interesting because I mean, if I was leading the Leave campaign in 2019, I would make it a campaign about betrayal and nothing whatsoever to do with the European Union.
It would be,
quite frankly.
The main campaign will be about trust in democracy.
Yeah.
And if there was a second referendum, I'm absolutely convinced we would win it 60-40. Because, two reasons. I think a number of moderate Remain voters have not been impressed the way the EU have behaved in this negotiating process. I think another element of moderate Remain voters would say we've had a vote and we need to respect democracy. And the real danger would be the betrayal of millions of people who had never voted before. And we hear wonderful stories of people who got to the polling booth and, this was the first time ever. It was a massive moment. And, democracy is such a great thing. To encourage those people to then turn around to them and say, sorry, folks, you didn't do as you were told, so we've got to rerun it. I don't know where that would all end, but we would look ridiculous. And then think about this.
What if, just imagine a scenario, sorry to butt in, but just imagine a scenario where the Prime Minister comes back with a deal that looks like Chequers, okay? It goes to Parliament. Parliament can't pass it. Surely then you would be on the same side as many Remainers in saying, actually, let's have a referendum and let's have three options: Remain, Leave without a deal, and Chequers.
No, absolutely. No, hang on. No, I would say quite rightly.
A new fan club.
Quite rightly, Parliament should vote down Chequers because it's a really, really bad deal, and then the MPs, I think, should listen to the mood of the country, which is, let's just leave. And by the way, leaving means no money.
Yeah.
And I think that is the mood of the country. I don't think Westminster realises that. I don't think the media realise that. But that, in my view, is the mood of the country. Just leave. Now, you're right. What I think will happen is Parliament, through some weird mechanism, will say we've got to extend Article 50, and there might even be a motion to have a second referendum. If there was to be a second referendum, it's not three answers, it's two answers. Do you accept Chequers or do you accept the WTO deal? And a WTO deal would win hands down.
I'm not going to have an argument with you about this, but I feel I have to say, the EU would say, and I suspect the withdrawal agreement will say very, very clearly, that the 39 billion is a liability payment, not a payment about the future.
Who on earth would sign up to pay £1 million or 39 billions of pounds without a sensible deal that is acceptable in return? I mean, and you just couldn't sanction it. You could not sanction it. And let's remember, the House of Lords, no less. Our noble peers, Milad. They said there is no legal liability to pay a bean. Right? When you leave a golf club or a gym, you don't pay for the future pensions of all the staff in that club, do you?
Well, I was just saying there will be an argument about that.
Of course there'll be an argument. Fine, but the money's in our pocket, it's not in their pocket.
Would you, if we sign the withdrawal deal, and let's say we sign and leave, would you at that point use that 39 billion as a negotiating and just renege on?
No, hang on, sorry.
I mean, there are some people who say, we'll use that as a bargaining chip once we've left and we've signed an agreement. We'll just get back on our work.
If we're foolish enough to sign a withdrawal agreement without some form of acceptable trade agreement, being there simultaneously, and we've signed that legally, then of course, legally, we've got to pay it. How stupid would we be?
Okay, but you know we can't have a trade agreement simultaneously, so...
Why not?
Because they won't negotiate one.
What?
We will not have a trade agreement before we leave the European Union.
Look, the EU have said to us, the EU have said to us, they've said to leave means leave when John Longworth went over there a few months ago. You can have a Canada-style deal anytime you want.
Yeah.
After you've left.
Yeah, but you agree that, what happens is, you agree the heads of terms,
Yep.
okay? It's like a lease in property. You agree the heads of terms, you say, right, the deal's done, and the minute after, midnight on the 29th of March, right, we're going to send you X billion pounds, and the deal is in place, the Canada-style deal.
Can we just go back to the Prime Minister for a minute?
That's how it will work. And people talk about, oh yeah, but you've got all these problems with the sort of WTO schedules and things. Look, what you agree heads of terms, you deposit the schedules with the WTO, and you've got 10 years, basically, as I understand, with the WTO, basically to then sort out dotting the I's and crossing the T's and all the boring stuff.
Well, it's not dotting the I's and crossing the T's, it's dealing with, I think at last count, it was about 25 complaints as to what we've put in so far, each of which will require a dispute resolution.
And that is standard, normal practice under the way the WTO works. But guess what? Trade goes on in the interim.
Yeah.
At what point did Theresa May lose your support, if she ever had it?
A minute after she finished the Florence speech.
Okay.
We were the first people to criticise it when lots of Tory MPs were saying how wonderful it was. We smelt what it was, and you know it was a terrible speech. She conceded loads and asked for nothing.
Yeah.
So you were on board with Lancaster House?
Yes, that was a great speech.
Yeah.
You know, and that's Brexit. Excellent. And if she wakes up tomorrow morning having seen this on live stream and thinks, goodness, I must meet Richard for the first time.
Watching it now.
He's right. Actually, let's do a Canada-style deal. Then you know, away we go.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to spend ages on this, but I have to say, do you accept the fact that that will cause enormous problems for Ireland?
No, I don't at all.
Why not?
Look, the whole Irish thing has been inflated very cleverly by the other side with complicit help from our own officials, and this is deeply shocking.
In what way?
Complicit help. They have confected this issue. So let's be very clear. We've said we don't want a hard border. The Ireland has said we don't want a hard border. The EU have said they don't want a hard border. The EU's own expert, Lars Carlson, who wrote this great pamphlet, Smart Borders 2, I think it's called. Okay. It's really important to get into this because all of this stuff, the technology is there, right, to deal with it away from the border. So you don't need a hard border, and we've just fallen almost deliberately for their negotiating tactic. So we now have, in the last 10 days, we have direct evidence.
How do you check a chicken with technology?
How do you check a chicken with technology?
Yeah, I mean,
It's
the World Trade Organization
so-
will impose those checks on the border under WTO rules, which we love.
So what happens to chickens that go through Rotterdam into the EU 27?
to customs union.
No, if they've come from outside, let me tell you what happens. They're checked 12 miles inland.
No, they're also...
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Well, geography gets in the way in the case of Northern Ireland. I mean, if you go to Rotterdam, there are lanes that things are streamed down, which you can't do. I mean, once you've crossed the border in Ireland, you've crossed and you're lost. So, practically...
Lost? Who's lost?
Practically, that won't matter. Secondly, what happens to regulatory checks? What happens to checks about standards and things like that if they're not done on the border?
Well, the reality is, if you're exporting to a country, you've got to produce those goods for that country. But it's all done by... firstly, let's take Northern Ireland. I think there's only about 50 firms that really are large enough, frankly, to worry about. A third of what goes across that border, as I understand, is milk and livestock, right? And there are about 50 big firms. Most of them they can either be authorised economic operators and/or trusted trader status. Yeah, the reality is, take Diageo, that makes a delicious drink called Guinness. and it sends loads of it to Northern Ireland every year. And it doesn't get checked on the borders that it tastes right, okay? Diageo send a cheque to HMRC for £250 million a year.
But this
And they don't get a single cheque from HMRC. Guess what? HMRC trusts them.
But this is where your vision of deregulation runs into it, isn't it? I mean, let's just say we become this buccaneering, free-trading, low-tariff economy, right?
It's a great
good
word.
word.
It's a great word.
Thank you. At that point, surely at that point, there is a massive incentive for people here to take advantage of our lower tariffs and go sell stuff through the border that doesn't exist inside the EU market.
I just don't buy it. I really don't. But competition's a good thing. Let's remember that. And let's think about, so what's Ireland's corporation tax? 12.5%. Ours is currently 19, right, heading down to 17. In my view, Northern Ireland should be what we should have around some of our other ports around the country. The whole of Northern Ireland should be basically a free port, right? Just imagine, talk about, the economy on steroids. That would be fantastic for Northern Ireland. In the same way that Teesside, that Felixstowe, we should have free ports so that you create these tax-free zones so that goods can come in, you value add, and they go out, no tariffs. And that's fantastic. And that creates manufacturing jobs in some of the poorest, most vulnerable parts of our country. That's part of what we should be aiming for.
Okay, I mean, I buy that. I mean, I don't think it deals with Northern Ireland, but I don't want to turn this into a session on Northern Ireland, so I'm going to keep moving on.
What's the direct evidence you were going to tell us about?
No, sorry, yeah, I did get distracted. It's so exciting. We've heard it direct from EU officials that our own officials haven't put forward the sort of proposals that have been put forward by the European Research Group in terms of dealing with the Irish issue. That's the basic starting point for a negotiation. Apparently, unless we're being lied to by those officials, apparently our side haven't even asked for that. That's the direct evidence.
If this technology exists, why isn't it being used on the Norway-Sweden border? I mean, why isn't it being deployed anywhere yet? There is no border that does what the ERG, it's absolutely true, what the ERG says we should be doing.
But the whole point of technology is progress. I mean,
Oh, so it's,
if Graham Bell hadn't invented the phone, we wouldn't have the iPhone. I mean, come on, you've got to look forwards, not say, well, because no one's ever done it, it doesn't mean it can't be done. It's a unique opportunity that we should embrace to say, do you know what? Actually, this could set the gold standard for the whole world in terms of how you deal with this stuff.
And what the EU is saying is, when you've invented it, that's fine. Until then, we need to have the backstop.
Why? No, they don't need the backstop.
But haven't you just said that actually this is technology we will need to develop?
Well, look, most of it exists, right? In my view, a combination of cameras, trusted trader status, and authorised economic operators deals with it. Right? If the EU say, do you know what? Let's try that. It's not perfect, but it's okay. Let's try that for 5 years and then develop if it can get even better. Great. Let's embrace it and say, let's develop the best system in the world. Let's also remember, you talk about inflating an issue. The truth is, the quantity of money, of trade, that goes across the Irish border, in the overall context of the EU, it's literally a round of drinks.
In your ideal world, what would be the terms under which we left? I mean, if you could design the Brexit deal, what would it be?
It'd be based on the Canada deal. Yeah.
With no pluses?
1+, 1.5 pluses. You don't need many pluses. I mean, it's...
Well, you need the whole security stuff, surely. I mean, we're not...
Well, in my view, security is completely separate. And, let's remember, security is covered... the best bits of our security in our country is NATO and the Five Eyes relationship. Mm-hmm. And the other Four Eyes are not part of the EU. Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, there's still quite a lot of rather effective internal security coordination.
And quite properly, the Prime Minister offered that. She offered it unconditionally, which, you can have a debate about that, but the Prime Minister's offered that. Let's also remember, take Galileo, for example, the project where we've invested nearly £2 billion. Galileo only works if they use 3 bits of sovereign British soil around the world, right? If they want to chuck us out of it, fine, we'll develop our own system. It'll be, let's make it better and faster. But by the way, guys, you can't use our 3 bits of turf around the world.
I reckon I know the answer to this. What do you think would be the economic impact of that kind of Brexit on Britain in the short, medium and long term?
Look, if we make it very clear, the reason we've got uncertainty at the moment is because no one knows how it's going to look. If we make it crystal clear, the Prime Minister wakes up tomorrow morning, accepts the Canada deal, Tice was right, let's go for it, then actually the uncertainty's dealt with. And then let me tell you, our stock market will go up, people will start, investing more and more money into the UK. It's literally like it's like a switch that's waiting to go off. So the opportunity is there. Now, if the government keeps progressing, this deal that nobody likes except number 10 and a few people in the cabinet, then that's the worst of all worlds. Economically, politically.
Why does the Japanese ambassador talk about Brexit as a betrayal of years of Japanese investment then?
I don't know. He'll have to explain himself more clearly.
Well, I mean, I can explain.
I haven't met him, I don't know.
I can explain what he says. I'm not going to speak for him, but basically what he says is our investments in this country are based on the fact of ease of access to the European market, and a Canada-style deal, whatever its benefits, is going to create friction in our trade with the European Union, which will make trade harder.
It doesn't need to create friction.
It will.
People say it creates friction. Look, and if it creates, at the end of the day, tariffs, it's sort of 1%, 2%, 3%. That's not the difference between a good business and a good product and a bad business and a bad product. I don't think that betrays years of investment at all. The Japanese have invested, they've got some fantastic plants. Nissan in Sunderland, I think, is one of the top 3 or 4 car plants in the world. It's amazing and we should be incredibly proud of it. Hey, guess what? We might buy more Nissans, hopefully electric ones, produced in this country rather than buying Mercedes or BMWs. I don't know. It's called buying power.
But it's also, but also a modern economy depends fundamentally on trade.
Yep.
Economies depend more heavily on trade with their neighbours than they do on trade with other people. Okay.
Geography.
Yeah. Should we have a word about geography?
Yeah.
Are you in the sort of Liam Fox school that geography is dead?
I wish it was dead when I was at school. I was very bad at it. Look, the reality is we live in a global world and things move incredibly quickly all over the world. And so I think the issue of physical proximity is much, much less important than it was. That's the real truth.
There's even a geographic effect on eBay. Trade patterns on eBay show a massive geographical balance for all sorts of reasons, shipping speed, language, all sorts of reasons. So even in this most modern of trading places, let alone more old-fashioned manufacturing,
In which case, fine, then everybody should accept, let's do a quick Canada deal and move on. It all points to a Canada deal, which is why it's so inexplicable that this government refuses to embrace it.
But coming back to my initial point, a Canada deal will imply greater difficulty in trading with the EU.
Yeah, but let's remember, under the World Trade Organization, some dreadful sounding name like sort of trade facilitations agreement or something. The whole point is that actually countries are being encouraged to reduce friction. There's a legal obligation under WTO to reduce friction, not increase it. So again, it's a great opportunity to say, hey, guess what? Let's between us embrace that and let's make it, frictionless on the basis of a Canada deal. It's either people that don't want us to leave, or it's the EU because they're negotiating that say there's going to be all sorts of friction put up.
Well, the EU will put up barriers. We know that.
Well, they're saying they will.
And if we drop our tariffs with the European Union, there's another WTO provision that says we have to do it with everyone. Are you seriously saying we scrap all our tariffs?
No, but I tell you what, stuff that we don't produce, there's no point having tariffs on coffee, on oranges, right, and things like that we don't produce. Of course we should scrap those immediately. Of course we should say to the United States, we're going to reduce 10% on cars to 0.
And where are you on agriculture? Are you in favour of maintaining agricultural tariffs to protect farming sector here?
Yeah, I think on the farm sector, yes. Farming has always been subsidised by the UK, way before we joined the EU. Most developed nations around the world subsidise their farmers. You know, food security is critically important. So yes, we should give that. But what we do want to, at the end of the day, the great thing about having control is you can say, well, look, let's change the rules here, there, and let's try it for 3 or 4 years. And you might make some mistakes. Guess what? Let's change them, learn from them. The big arable barons, they accept that they've had a pretty good deal compared to the small livestock farmers up in, places like the Lake District. So that's got to change. That's about having our own control, being able to make our own decisions, and guess what? Try things. And if we make a mistake, adjust it.
You said of the no-deal notices that the government came out with, and I've got the quote here, that it was scaremongering made up by the same people who designed the referendums Project Fear. This is Dominic Raab you're talking about.
No, he read it out. He didn't write the notices.
But he basically approved them.
Well, he read them out. As I say, they will have been produced. They would have been produced by officials in the departments.
For him,
right?
as the
For
minister.
him, yeah. And, so but as I say...
But he's not a Remainer scaremonger, is he?
No, he's not. He's a Brexiteer. But the reality is, in my view, everything that has come out of the government departments, it has been a stream of negativity. Right, let's just, I've talked about some of the positives here this evening. How much positivity have we heard come out of any single government department about Brexit? I might be wrong on some stuff, but I'm not wrong on everything.
Well, I think you hear quite a lot of positivity out of DEFRA, actually, at the moment. But the fact is, isn't there just a hint of a possibility that some of these forecasts might be right?
Well, based on the track record, no.
What track record?
Well, apparently, these are the same people that said we were going to lose 500,000 jobs, the banks would flee, the tech firms would leave, property prices would crash, and all of this stuff. And actually, exactly the opposite's happened. Exactly the opposite. And let's remember, 2 days ago, the Chancellor had a windfall amount of cash to spend, right? Because these own officials in the Treasury got their forecasts a year ago badly wrong. Okay, so so they've just got a track record of being too conservative, too negative, getting it wrong. And actually, I live in a world where the glass is always half full, it's never half empty.
I'm sure the Treasury always is understating how much money we're going to have. I'm not sure the forecasts always do that.
Well, for the last year, consistently, it's turned out that actually we're going to borrow less and less this year and next year. So their track record is not good. It's never been good.
I've done this very badly because there's a whole section of questions I'm not going to be able to ask you because time is really... But I want to talk to you about politics a little bit. And the first thing is Leave means Leave simply a Brexit lobbying organisation, or is it the infrastructure for a new political party?
It's the former.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And there aren't people within it who see it as possibly the latter.
Look, we're a group, we're cross-party, no party. We've had a range of speakers on our rallies, which have been great fun for anybody who's been to them. So no, we are a lobbying organisation getting the message out that we've got to chat Chequers. And what's amazing is the impact of social media, technology. Over 1 million people have watched on live stream our rallies. I mean, that's a huge number of people.
Just like this event. Well,
just like this event,
But take, for instance, the hypothetical that we end up signing up to a deal that is Chequers, that Parliament votes it through, that becomes where we are. There are those who say in those circumstances we need a new UKIP, and you're kind of creating the infrastructure. I mean, are you thinking along those terms, along those lines?
I'm not currently, because I'm just totally focused on persuading who needs persuading to chuck Chequers, and then that won't be a scenario. Believe it or not, I've actually got a day job.
Who would you like to be the next leader of the Tory party?
Oh, goodness. A Brexiteer, that would be a help. Look, there's...
Well, firstly, how long do you think the current Prime Minister will survive? Do you think she'll be there until we've left?
I don't think she'll be there in 12 months' time.
Okay.
And I think the next leader of the party will be a Brexiteer. there would be 3 or 4 that I think would do an excellent job.
Oh, go on. Come on. 3 or 4 names.
Yeah, I mean, we all know Boris wants to put his name forward. You know, there's other names like, you know, I'm quite sure Dominic would put his name forward. You know, who knows, Jacob might, Penny Mordaunt might, Pretty might. There's a whole load of you know, great Brexiteers who would all be, you know, ambitious about it.
Do you think if the Conservative Party changed its leader now, we would be able to do Brexit better? Do you think that would be helpful if the Tory Party was to suddenly...
Unless the Prime Minister wakes up very soon and says, you know, I've misread this, we need to go to a Canada deal. If she did that, or if she woke up and said, actually, we're just going to WTO, she would be the most popular Prime Minister for a very long time. So she still has a huge opportunity, and the question is whether she'll grasp it. But otherwise, then, in order to get the sort of Brexit that I think Leave has voted for, then the sooner there's a change of Prime Minister, the better.
Yeah.
What if things play out totally differently and the Prime Minister comes back with a deal that looks far more like EEA than WTO and Parliament passes that?
That's not Brexit. EEA is not Brexit. You know, I mean, before, I think before, you know, during the referendum, lots of the Remainers were saying, you know, an EEA would be the worst of all worlds. And now they're saying
But to be fair, lots of leavers were saying we're not going to be leaving the single market. I mean, things were said in the referendum by both sides that they'd like us to forget now.
I'm not sure. I can't think of any, you know, people on our side that were saying we're going to stay in the single market. The government's own leaflet said we were, you know, our relationship with the single market.
They were on your side.
They weren't on our side.
No.
No, look, the EEA is not the solution. There is a legitimate debate to be had about, well, if we're not able to get this sorted over the next few months because we haven't got the right people doing it, then what's the holding pattern? You can have a legitimate argument and say, well, you could have EEA with a sunset clause of, you know, but it needs to be short. I mean, we're of the camp, you don't even need a transition period, let alone extending it.
So you could live with an EEA, you could live with a...
No, I think, no, it's not a question of living with it. It's a question of, it wouldn't surprise me if as some form of leaving process, if Parliament plays all sorts of silly games, we could end up there. You know, I think it would be a bad place to end up, and the real danger is, unless you put in a very strict sunset clause that it terminates, that we end up staying there, and that would be just a huge wasted opportunity.
But in the event, through incompetence or EU stubbornness or whatever reason you might want to say is responsible for it, we end up without a trade deal as we're coming towards exit day. Do you accept the need for something to tide us through in between leaving and signing up to that new deal? Just, if nothing else, just to prevent businesses from having to adapt twice.
Yeah, well, then get it sorted now. Let's not, you know, as I said just now, we don't need a transition period. You know, we can just, you know, we can deal with stuff. We can sit down and say, right, guys, we've got to sort this by Christmas.
Yeah. But in the event we don't, you could.
It's so negative. I'm an optimist. I mean, you know, I'd love Theresa May to phone up and say, Richard, just come in and help us sort it out, because, you know, this bless them. You know, the civil servants have tried, and for whatever reason, they're just not succeeding.
You've just said she's only got 12 months left. She's not going to be ringing you now.
I wrote in Conhome a year ago that, you know, we needed to replace the negotiating team. You know, they haven't, and the situation's got worse.
Just one final question about the great beyond. I mean, what beyond Brexit do you think most needs to be fixed about this country? I mean, what is the public policy priority for this country once we're out?
I think we need to, as a Conservative that believes in free markets, in enterprise, in innovation, we need to, the most important thing is actually we need to regain our mojo, our confidence, our belief in our country, and to say, actually, you know, we're fantastic. Let's believe in ourselves. Let's go for it. And we can debate about the economic rights of that, but, you know, my view, go for growth. Encourage entrepreneurs, small businesses, and all the economic policies should be driving that, driving innovation, let's encourage disruptors. And there's a really important thing to say, actually, because we're not far from the city here. The biggest threat to the City of London is not Brexit. It's a hideous thing called MiFID II, right? And this is really important stuff because no politicians are talking about this. But that is what's happening. People are leaving London, not because of Brexit, because under MiFID II, they can't talk to their own office and read their own research in New York. This stuff's happening now. That's why. That's about deregulating. It's about smart regulation, not daft regulation.
Brilliant. I've done this wrong.
It's a terribly boring way to finish.
No, this is an exciting way to finish because this is the highlight of the evening. I'm going to give you a beer mug.
Thank you very much.
A beer and Brexit beer mug and say thank you ever so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. Oh, hang on. I've got to do my quick fire round. Oh, thank you, Ben. Ready?
Yep.
Beer or Burgundy?
Burgundy.
Beatles or the Stones?
Beatles.
Cheddar or Camembert?
Cheddar.
This one matters to me. Oasis or Blur?
Oasis.
Well done. Beef bourguignon or steak and ale pie?
Beef bourguignon.
Dearie me. UK in a changing Europe or any other think tank you can think of?
I might have to think about that.
I might have to take that mug back.
You're doing a great job.
Richard, thank you ever so much. It's been brilliant. Cheers.
Thank you very much.